It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 192. It is very late November or early December, depending on when you're hearing this. In 2016, we will have our interview a little later in the show. It is with Karen Garst. She has written a book about women beyond belief, discovering life without religion. So it is exploration of those topics. I'm sure you're going to enjoy the interview. A couple things we're going to do today. The Investing Skeptically segment. And by the way, I think I haven't done this in a while, so I'm just going to give a review for new listeners. The show is generally 1/3 finance, 2/3 atheism, although I get to do whatever I want because my name is on the show. But today we're going to talk about 401ks for the Investing Skeptically segment. And the idea of investing skeptically is that you should use your skeptical powers to analyze your investments just like you might to analyze homeopathy or Bigfoot or anything else in your life. And if it's important, it should be true and it should be verifiable and it should be based on facts. And that's where I think finance and investing and religion or my atheism actually can work together, because a lot of times I see investing a lot like religion, especially in the insurance industry. They create fear and they make you unsure what you're doing. They provide a solution to that fear, just like the church does, and then they take your money. They sell you something and you give them money and you get next to nothing for it, or at least you don't get as much as you think you should. So it's kind of tricksy, which is really clever. And so from time to time, we'll explore the cleverness of individual products, and sometimes it's just basics on investing, like today. The other thing I did want to let everyone know is that it should be completely unnoticeable to you, but somewhere in the next month or so, my feed will move. Hopefully it all automatically updates and you'll never even know that it happened, but I'm not as technically savvy as the experts who are doing this, so I'm using their expertise and I'm letting you know just in case a few weeks from now your feed stops updating. I did not stop putting out shows. I expect to continue doing this for quite some time, so if you stop getting updates or new shows in December, I mean, there might be a little break for Christmas and New Year's, but if in January you're not getting new shows, please contact me. Let me know that something broke. Tell me what you used to get the show, and I will try to relay that to the team of experts who can fix it. But the show will still be hosted at Spreaker, so that will not change. You can always go there and find it and put in the feed link from there. Or what I'm working on setting up is the feed/blog posts, which I haven't done in a long time, and maybe I'll start doing some more of those, will be able to be found going forward on the Polaris Financial Planning website. It's just polarisfinancialplanning.com. You go there and you'll see one of the pages is the Phil Ferguson Show podcast and blog. So you'll be able to do that. That's all under construction, so you won't be able to see it today, but hopefully soon. And then at some point, like I said, they flip the magical switch and everything redirects, and it should be good. This will allow me more flexibility in the podcast posts, and in case you want to see more information and links or analysis in the description of the podcast text becomes a blog, I guess. So anyway, technical stuff that will probably not affect most of you, but I wanted to give you a heads up in case you lose it and you know to re-find it, re-look for it, or you can let me know that there's a problem. Another thing I want to bring up, I guess, is back in June, I think it was June or early July. Yes, it had to be early July because I've been talking about long-term bonds and how they behave. And sometimes long-term bonds can make a lot of money. And sometimes long-term bonds can lose a lot of money, especially if they're high-quality bonds because they're very sensitive to interest rate fluctuations. In late June, when the Brexit vote happened, U.S. long-term bonds spiked in price. So if you owned them, you made a lot of money, assuming you sold them. The yield, the amount of dividends went from almost 4% to almost 3% in a very short period of time. And when yields fall, prices go up. We've done that show before, and I'm sure I'll do it again, but just a quick note here. And I told people at that time that if you still own long-term bonds, get out now. And I just wanted to give you an update. Since early July through today, long-term bonds, as measured by the Vanguard Long-Term Bond Investment Grade Mutual Fund, because it's really easy to look at and compare, it has lost 9% of its value. So if you were worried about the stock market falling, which lately it hasn't, but you went to long-term bonds, you lost 9%. So that's a problem. And we had that warning back in early July to get out of long-term bonds. We've been saying that for quite some time. I still stand by that. It is expected, I guess. There's no way to know for sure, but as things change, as the economy continues to grow, whether it's under Obama or Trump, if the economy keeps getting stronger, if the Fed starts increasing rates, long-term interest rates will go up, short-term interest rates will go up, and long-term bonds are much more sensitive to changes in interest rate fluctuations. They will go down in value, and you could lose an awful lot of money. If you're not sure what kind of bonds you have in your portfolio, of course, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Please just send me an email, include your phone number so I can call you. We'll set up a time to talk. Please do not just send statements or documents or financial information until you at least talk to me. I don't want you to send something and then ask me if I got it and me say no because maybe you typed in the address wrong and it went to somebody else. We don't want that to happen. So please confirm with me by voice that you have sent the email to the correct place, and let's talk about it and see what we can figure out. Of course, you can do a lot of this research on your own. The site I use is morningstar.com. You type in the 5-digit letter, the code for your mutual fund, and you want to look for a number called duration. And duration will tell you how sensitive that bond fund is to interest rate fluctuations. I'm definitely wanting durations under 5, and the bulk of your portfolio should be under 4, maybe even under 3. And so what that means is if the duration is 15, if interest rates go up 1%, your bond fund will lose 15%. Now, there's other factors that can affect that, but these are things to look at to know at least what you're investing in. If you really want the long-term bond fund and you're okay and you understand that volatility, that's fine. It's something that I have been recommending against for a while, and I stand by that. So in reference to 401ks, I recently received an email from Ben, and Ben said, Phil, I just got a new job with a $20,000 pay increase. Congratulations, Ben. He goes on, but they don't have a 401k. What do I do with the old 401k? Well, like Ben, many people change jobs from time to time, and a little bit of research I did says it's about 4 to 5 years. So you probably have an old 401k if you've been working for a while, and I've had people contact me that have multiple 401ks. I think the record so far is a couple that came to me that was pushing 60 years of age, and they had, well, what they first said was they thought they had 12 old 401ks, and it turned out to be 14 old 401ks because they were in IT, And every 4 or 5 years, they changed jobs, and they never bothered to move the 401ks, the old ones, that is. So they ended up with a situation, like many people, of random accounts, random investments, no real plan, and that can hurt your overall performance. That can put you at risk. And sometimes, and they had this situation, some of the old companies went bankrupt. So when you call the old employer to ask them how to move the money, there's nobody there. So you have to figure out who has become the custodian or the trustee for those accounts and figure out what you've got to do and how you've got to move it. And if you've also moved from time to time from these jobs, I have had people actually lose, they didn't lose the money, they lost track of old accounts that have more than $100,000 in them. Don't be a victim of this. So what you need to do is be active and take care of those old 401ks. And of course, make sure that you're saving as much money as possible, not just in general, but in the 401ks if it's appropriate for you. I actually had a couple of people email me and say, Phil, you don't say suck-ass minimum anymore. So, all right, here it is. Here's the gratuitous. If you are saving 10% because you've heard that all your life that you should save 10%, that will only work if you start investing when you're about 20 or 22, if you want to retire at 62. 10% is what I call the suck-ass minimum. For most people, it is not going to work because you are not saving 10% at 22 and then every year for the rest of your life. Things happen. Things come up. You might take an extra vacation that you probably couldn't afford, but you didn't save in your 401k that year. You have kids. You have kids that want to go to college and you want to pay for part of it. All of these things dramatically affect the amount you can save. So your goal should be 20%. And because I have the world's smartest audience, they say 20% of gross or net. That is gross. So if you make $100,000, whether it's just you or you and your spouse or significant other, you should be saving $20,000 a year. Now, the next question that everyone always asks me, what if I put 14% in my 401k and my company gives me 6? 14 plus 6, 20%. That works for me. It doesn't have to be 20% out of your pocket, but it's got to come from somewhere, usually out of your pocket. If you're not saving 20%, you are going to have to assume that Social Security will be 100% there, which may or may not happen. If you're close, I think you're safe. Don't panic. But if you're 30, I don't know. The other thing, of course, is if you retire before 65, how are you going to get health insurance? Because Medicare doesn't start till 65. And if things come up or you skip a year when you're doing that 10%, you're going to have a problem. Anywho, back to our 401ks. They were created from a thing called ERISA, and that's the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Created in 1974 and has been modified and changed a lot. Matter of fact, last year, the Department of Labor made some new rules that applied to ERISA accounts. That they expanded the definition of who had to become a fiduciary and who had to help you and put your interests above theirs. And that back in April of 16, and of course the Republicans promptly passed a law saying that would make it too expensive for companies to provide you with advice. And it would create paperwork and hassles, all of which I think is industry speak for we don't want to be responsible. Congress passed a law to overrule the rules passed by the Labor Department, and it went to Obama, and he vetoed it. Those rules don't go into effect until April of 2017, and I have every expectation that in February of 2017, Congress will pass a law again to overturn the rules, and it will go to, so it appears, our elected President Trump, and I have every expectation that he will not veto it. So if you're waiting for things to change to get better, it's probably not going to happen. You have to be active. Anyway, so many fun things to talk about. Back to 401ks. You leave your job, and this is a 401k or a 403b. 403bs are often called TSAs or tax sheltered annuity. In that context, the word annuity is not so bad. Not bad at all, actually. A 403b is like a 401k. So the question is, you've changed jobs. Now what do you do with the money? You have 4 basic options that I'm going to go over. Cashing out, taking the money directly, leaving your money where it is, moving your money to a new 401k, or rolling it over to an IRA or a Roth IRA if it's a Roth 401k. And those are in order of bad to good. And that's another thing that sometimes I get from listeners. If something is suboptimal, it doesn't make it inherently bad. As an example, I am not in love with target date funds. But sometimes people send me the list of funds that they have available in their 401k, and they say, what do I pick? I know you said all the target date funds are bad. No, I didn't say all the target date funds are bad. I'm saying that often there is a better way to invest. However, if the other ways to invest in your 401k are awful, the target date fund is a really good choice. So it's all about options and comparisons. So if you have this 401k or a 403b from your old job and you leave for whatever reason, voluntarily, involuntarily, you retire, you quit, whatever, one of the things you can always do is you can contact your former employee and you can say, send me the money. Now, it's cash out, but of course they don't send you a big pile of cash. They send you a check and you can put it in your bank. This is the worst option and is wrong in almost every single case. Some company plans will have a rule that if you have under 1,000 or 5,000 or even 10,000, that they can automatically cash you out. And within a few days or weeks or months of you leaving employment, they'll just up and send you a check. You still do not have to cash that check. It's unfortunate that they do this because it's a pain in the butt. You can still put it into an IRA, and I'll get to that when I get to it. But try not to cash out your 401k. It can grow tax deferred. Another one of your choices is you can keep that 401k with your former employer. If you really like your options and you really like the investments that are there and they're really low cost, you may leave it there. Unfortunately, if you keep changing jobs through the future, you're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 old 401ks. And like I said before, with my example couple, sometimes companies go out of business. It's still your money, and it's probably kept track of somewhere, but it makes more work for you to move it later, so you want to try to avoid that when you can. Another thing that sometimes happens with companies, they will change their 401k plan, and they may have good investments when you left, but they suddenly become bad investments. It's like if you've ever worked for a company that changed the healthcare plan and you had to change doctors or you had to change your deductibles. Sometimes HR departments seem to make changes simply because they want to validate the existence of their job. Because if they never change the 401k or the medical plan, then obviously they're not doing due diligence to check. But sometimes it's not in your best interest when they make those changes. So if you leave your money behind, you will get whatever is provided to you. If it's a good plan when you leave and they change to a sucky plan, you will now have a sucky plan and you have nothing to say about it. They will do a thing called mapping, where they will map your current investments to the closest new investment. And if the fees are wildly higher, then you're just going to have to pay the wildly higher fees. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it unless you take the money out. And when they announce that they're changing plans, often there's a blackout period. So you may not even be able to get it out before it changes, but hopefully soon after. So I'm not a real big fan of leaving it behind for all those reasons. The other thing you can do, of course, is move it into your new company's 401k if they allow it. It is something that I do not recommend, because why go from one 401k to another 401k? And interestingly, if your new employer's 401k is good, because if it was terrible to start with, you wouldn't want to move your old 401k into your new 401k. But if you move it into a new 401k and it's good, and they decide to switch to a sucky plan, there's nothing you can do because you can't take the money out unless you quit. So if you have a big 401k from a previous job that you roll into your new 401k, and then they switch to a terrible plan, you're stuck unless you leave that job. So I don't see the advantage in that at all. What you want to do is roll over your old 401k, all of your 401ks. My preference is to the same one place. You can do it on your own. You can contact me and I can help you do that. Everything's an option. And you put it all together. And often what former employers will want to do, and some brokerage firms want to do this, if you have an old 401k, they want to, and this is a weird thing with English, my apologies, they want to roll over your old 401k into a rollover IRA. It's the same word, but it has slightly different meanings, which is frustrating to everybody. So the rollover, I guess, the verb to roll over your money from a 401k to an IRA, that's the process of simply moving your money from one location to another. It probably will still be in the same investments. It will still be owned by you and be in your name. It'll change from a 401k to an IRA. And what the major thing that changes is that you're changing the custodian. So the person that holds the money might go from Fidelity to Schwab, as an example. And it's still your money. You still have access to it. And there are some rule differences between 401k and IRA, but mostly it's the same, and it's fine, and it moves over. Now, if the money moves over into a rollover IRA, the name of that specific type of IRA, what that means is that money is currently and is intended to be held separately, and they don't want you to add to it because you could theoretically at some point take a rollover IRA and put it into a future employer's 401k, even the new job. So you could go from a 401k to a rollover IRA, and you preserve that right to move it into the new 401k now or at some time in the future. I don't see the value in that, just for the same reason I don't see the value in putting it into your new company's 401k plan. So it can be called a rollover, but just go for a straight traditional deductible IRA. That way you can add money very easily if you qualify, and you have many, many, many more choices. You have virtually every mutual fund you could ever want. You could use ETFs if that's what you desire. You can buy individual stocks and bonds. There's a lot of things you can do. Matter of fact, there's so many things that you can do that you can get yourself into trouble. So don't get nutty, but put it into an IRA. If it's a Roth 401k, of course, you can go into a Roth IRA. It seems like more and more companies now have an option. You can choose the 401k or the Roth 401k, and you can even put 50-50 or 70-30, and of course the big question is how much of which we'll have to do that as another show topic. So that's some basics about what to do with your old 401k. You do definitely want to, unless there's some other reason for your situation, you want to roll it over into a traditional IRA. If you need any help with that, of course, contact me. That's phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And what we're going to do now is take a little break for commercials, and then we're going to go into our interview.
And they told me the story all about this guy named Lehi who lived in Jerusalem in 600 BC. Now, apparently, in Jerusalem in 600 BC, everyone was completely bad and evil, every single one of them, man, woman, child, infant, fetus. And God came to Lehi and said to him, "Put your family on a boat and I will lead you out of here." And God did lead them. He led them to America. I said, America? From Jerusalem to America by boat in 600 BC? And they said, yes. Then they told me how Lehi and his descendants reproduced, and over the course of 600 years, there were two great races of them, the Nephites and the Lamanites. And the Nephites were totally, totally good, each and every one of them, and the Lamanites were totally bad and evil, every single one of them, just bad to the bone. Then, after Jesus died on the cross for our sins, on his way up to heaven, he stopped by America and visited the Nephites. And he told them that if they all remained totally, totally good, each and every one of them, they would win the war against the evil Lamanites. But apparently somebody blew it, because the Lamanites were able to kill all the Nephites, all but one guy, this guy named Mormon, who managed to survive by hiding in the woods. And he made sure this whole story was written down in reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics chiseled onto gold plates, which he then buried near Palmyra, New York. Well, I was just on the edge of my seat. I said, "What happened to the Lamanites?" And they said, "Well, they became our Native Americans here in the U.S." And I said, "So you believe the Native Americans are descended from a people who were totally evil?" And they said, "Yes." Then they told me how this guy named Joseph Smith found those buried gold plates right in his backyard. And he also found this magic stone back there that he put into his hat and then buried his face into. And this allowed him to translate the gold plates from the Reformed Egyptian into English. Well, at this point, I just wanted to give these two boys some advice about their pitch. I wanted to say, okay, don't start with this story. I mean, even the Scientologists know to start with a personality test before they start telling people all about Xenu, the evil intergalactic overlord.
This is Phil Ferguson with Polaris Financial Planning, the home of science-based investing. I see people owning really bad investments all of the time. Many advisors are paid a commission by a big company to sell you something you may not need. It's kind of like church. They create fear, then they tell you what you want to hear, and then they take your money. What you want is an advisor that is paid only by you. That is a fee-only fiduciary advisor. Remember, people work for who they are paid by. You can contact me, Phil, at PolarisFinancialPlanning.com, or listen to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Each show, we have an interesting investing skeptically topic and an interview with someone fighting to end religion. Polaris also gives 10% of gross revenue to support the growing secular movement. You're not just getting better investments, you're helping to change the world.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is, of course, Phil Ferguson, and you're listening to the cleverly titled Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have Karen Garst. How are you, Karen?
I am great, and thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure, and I want to recap a little for the listeners. We had pre-show, right, Karen and I, and we were talking about some cool things, and I coined a phrase or a concept that I'd thought about before, but Karen thought it was such a great idea. We have an open mic for Jesus, and so anytime he wants to chime in, there's a microphone, and he can come in. So if we happen to say anything that he disagrees with, he's free to jump in and correct us. How's that sound, Karen?
That sounds great, and feel free, Jesus, to interrupt me.
Yeah, at any time. It's kind of like the when I give money to Jesus, what I do is I put a $20 bill on the nightstand at night, and I figure if he needs it, he'll take it.
There you go.
I wake up in the morning, it's still there, so I guess he's got plenty of dough.
Must.
Excellent. Well, Karen, you have a blog, right?
I do have a blog. It is www.faithlessfeminist.com.
Fantastic. And let me. I'm wondering, what do you talk about there?
Well, I got to tell you a little backstory.
Yes, please.
When you write a book these days, as you well know, you have to do all the social media. So that was kind of new to me. So I hired somebody to help me. And we were talking about the name of it, and the first thing he suggested was Godless Grandmother. And, I said, maybe we don't want to emphasize that I'm a grandmother, So we came up with Faithless Feminist. And I deal with issues of women in religion. I do a lot of, looking at the mythology prior to Judaism, the other cultures in the Middle East. I do a lot of analysis of the Bible in relationship to those other mythologies. I talk a lot about the role of women in the Bible, and just I don't do a lot of current events, but that's kind of my focus.
You know what we call a grandmother in small town America?
What?
40-year-old.
I'm just a tad older than that.
that we used to live in a very, very small town that had a little newspaper, and their really big thing that they were so happy every so often they would have a photo, and in the photo would be 5 generations.
Wow.
And so you can figure that they aren't having children an average of every 30 years. So to get 5 generations into a photo takes some doing. But that was kind of a big feature for them to brag about how most of the people in the town have children under the age of 20.
Well, my parents are gone, and I have a son, so I've got 2 there. That's it.
Yeah, it's most common that way. But you also have a new book or a recent book?
It's was just released in September. It's called Women Beyond Belief: Discovering Life Without Religion.
And I'm assuming that's about how to handle losing your faith as a woman, right?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved, if you're interested.
Of course.
I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's a Pacific Northwest writer, and it was 2 days after SCOTUS had issued its decision in Burwell v. Hobby Lobby. And if you're familiar with that decision, if you're not familiar with it, it was where they decided the Hobby Lobby, the craft store, because it had religious views, didn't have to provide certain forms of birth control. So we were sitting there chatting about it, and she says, well, Karen, you need to write a book. And I said, well, the only thing I can get enthusiastic about is atheism. And it was a turning point for me because I've been an atheist for a couple decades, and I never joined a group. I never sought anything out. I slept in on Sundays. But that decision made me reflect back to my coming of age in the 60s and 70s. And I remember a time before Roe v. Wade. I remember a time before readily available birth control. And I don't want to go back there, and I don't want the young people to have to go through what we did. Well, and that's how I got involved.
It now looks like we have a chance of going right back there.
It is just amazing to me that Donald Trump got elected president. We don't need to go into the politics too much, but I think the biggest threats are the issue of climate change and women's reproductive rights.
Yeah, it's curious because one of the things my listeners know, and they've heard already because I've done a couple of shows where I've talked about the implications of Donald Trump on investing. And
interesting.
Predicting market directions are very, very difficult. So my standard answer for people is do not panic. Stay the course. Keep investing. It's a long run thing. And 3 to 4 years, Donald Trump will be out of office, and his effect on the economy should be small, but it might be positive. It might be negative. But I also have to caveat that by telling people that doesn't mean I'm terrified out of my fucking mind about his effect on women's rights and reproductive issues and climate change and immigrants and Muslims. I got lots of things to be worried about with Donald Trump. The stock market price is not one of them.
Well, and my son has been calling me almost daily since the election, and one of his issues was a loss in some stock market stock, and what he should do about it. And, he kind of panicked and took everything out, which wasn't a very good idea, but he had already done that. So,
well, I got very lucky that only one client out of about 300 insisted on taking their money out before the election. And now they're probably not very happy with that choice.
Interesting.
Yeah, it just so happened that the market went up significantly after it was clear that Trump had won, which I would not have predicted, but my specialty is not predicting. So
there you go.
tell me more. So you got this motivation, you got this desire, you've got something that lights a fire in your belly, atheism. What is the book do? Who's it for?
Well, I think that we all work with models. If you remember that picture of President Obama with that little boy who's African American who looks up at him and says, wow, President, that's really cool. I could do that. And I, for example, myself, in 9th grade, we had this science class on evolution. And this was, kind of before creationism. Nobody objected to it. We studied it. And I wrote this paper on early hominids and, Australopithecus erectus and all of that. And it was fascinating, but it never entered my mind that I could be an anthropologist. Because in my generation, women were nurses, teachers, or secretaries. And it wasn't as if you couldn't have gone out and done something different, because they're always trailblazers, but it never occurred to me. So I think this book, what I would like it to be, is a set of models for men or women who are kind of on the cusp. They have some doubts, they're not sure, and they can read these. And the nice thing about an anthology, if you're not getting into one of the essays, just skip it and go to the next one. But they can see people who've come from a wide variety of backgrounds. There's Jehovah's Witness, there's fundamental evangelicalism, there's Catholic, there's Jewish, there's everything in there. And they can say, wow, she did it, so can I. Or, I've been thinking a lot about that, and that really resonates with me. So I think it's a question of models. And I encourage your listeners who they're already atheists, how about a friend? How about somebody who's struggling with it and just kind of can't do it? That's who you buy the book for.
Well, I love the idea. And one of the things I've said before, recent surveys have said that about 20 to 22% of the U.S. population is currently no religion when asked by Pew Forum. What if all those people helped over the next year or two deconvert one person?
That'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and of course, everyone won't, but maybe you can be a star and deconvert 2 or 3 people, but it could be within a generation that we're at 35 to 45% of the population being non-religious. And when someone like Mike Pence stands up and says creationism is the way and it's got science backing it, we can just laugh him off the stage and he doesn't get elected and put in a position of closing Planned Parenthood locations.
Exactly. And one of my authors the other day asked if she could write to everyone else in the book, and I said, of course. And she made this plea for Planned Parenthood. She said, we need to do something. And I was very surprised at how many authors, essayists of my book responded and said, yes, absolutely, I'll give. And they just didn't respond to her. They responded to everyone. They wanted everyone to know that they were in this for the long term. And that was really encouraging to me. But I hope we don't have to get to a place where we have to start raising money to fly somebody to Oregon to have an abortion. I did read just this morning, there was a news article about they're doing research on a pill that you could use for an abortion after you kind of talk to a doctor online, etc. It's not currently available in the United States. But that may be something that we need to push too. But to think that you live in Texas and one day you're not going to be able to have the abortion, to me it's going back a century.
I agree. As a matter of fact, my kids are 21 and 19, I think. But when they were in their early teens, I sat them in my office, and I had bought Plan B from my local Planned Parenthood, by the way. And, of course, yes. I gave them a $20 tip on my way out. But I put that on my bookshelf in my office, and I told them what it was, and I showed them where it was. And if one day it happened to disappear, it would not be a problem for me.
That is so – I can't tell you. That is 180 degrees opposite from the way I was raised.
Yeah. Oh, well, we've been pretty chill with our kids just because we try really hard, and it gets harder and harder to remember what we were like as teenagers and what our friends had trouble with. And, and I even told my kids, it doesn't have to be for you or for my son, for his girlfriend, or my daughter for her.
It could be a friend of theirs.
It could be a friend of theirs. I'm not going to ask questions.
Parents like you.
I'm not going to ask questions. It's not my problem. And I also wanted to go, I was tempted to go to a regular pharmacy because I had a friend tell me this, that he went in to buy one, and the pharmacist said, "Who's this for?" And he turned to the pharmacist and he said, is this over the counter or is it not? And he says, yes, it's over the counter. And he goes, I don't have to answer your question. And the guy goes, I don't have to sell it to you. And he goes, yes, you do.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do. You're open to the public. You must sell it to me. I'm buying one. And he goes, well, who's it for? And he goes, put it on the counter, ring it up, and I'll pay you. And I don't have to answer your questions when I buy condoms. I don't have to answer your questions when I buy a Snickers bar. I'm not going to answer your questions when it comes to something that's legal for me to buy. It's just
Did
not.
he actually sell it to him?
He did, but he didn't want to. And the thing is, if it had been someone else who didn't want to make literally a federal case out of it, they probably would have just said no, and the person would have gone, oh, shucks, I'll try another store. And he's like, no, I'm not going to another store. You're going to sell it to me, and if you don't, it's going to get elevated, and you guys are going to get sued. So get your supervisor, get your district manager, get whoever you got to get, because you're selling this to me. You're open to the public. You, by law, have to sell it to me.
Good for him. Well, I think one of the, when I look back at my childhood and how I was raised, I think one of the biggest things that impacted me was absolutely no sex education. There wasn't any in the schools at the time. My mother told me about how my body worked. You know, the fifth grade film, you know, you go see and you come home and go, what were they talking about?
Right.
But she never told me how it might work with the male. And that has such an impact. I mean, just the lack of knowledge. I had to purloin my sister's Harold Robbins 79 Park Avenue and read about it. And in that particular novel, the shop owner rapes a young girl. That's how I learned about sex. And then, of course, I was in junior high and somebody was talking in the hall and they were talking about whores. And I said, no, it's not whore, it's war. It's WHORE. Well, that's what it's in. That's how it's spelled. That must be. I never even heard the word.
Yeah, you did live a little sheltered life there, didn't you?
Well, you know, Bismarck, North Dakota there.
I was going to say, yeah, that's not particularly a small town, but it's probably got more of a small town mentality than size would suggest.
Exactly.
Well, when I was growing up, the church that my parents took me to actually had sex ed for us.
Wow.
Well, that's Methodists for you.
Oh, there you go. Those liberals.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. They let women talk and vote and shit.
Well, when I attended Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, they had a really good French program, which was my first life as a French teacher. And there was no dancing on campus. You had to go to Moorhead State or NDSU or something. They literally did not allow dancing on campus.
Now, is Concordia Lutheran?
Yes.
What kind was it?
I think it was ALC. It wasn't, I know you mentioned on your show you were in Missouri Synod. It wasn't Missouri Synod. I think it was ALC. It was before the merger.
I see. Yeah, so no dancing, huh?
No dancing.
It was interesting. The church that I was pretending to be a member of would not allow gambling. Even a bingo or a raffle would not be allowed. But they would do a cakewalk. You know what a cakewalk is?
Kind of.
Well, you have a spring fair or something, and they make a big circle. It's kind of like musical chairs.
Oh, musical chairs. Yep.
In a parking lot, and they have 1 through 20, and everybody puts in $1, and you all walk around, and when the music stops, someone pulls a number 1 through 20 out of a hat, and if you pull out number 5, if you're standing in 5, you get to pick a cake or a pie from the table of all the things that people made. And I said, that's still gambling, and they go, no, it's not. No, it's not. So it was interesting because the official governing body did say that raffles were allowed if you followed all these rules, but the local branch, local office, local church that I was in said no anyway.
That's a hoot.
So I'm like, you're not even following your own rules.
Would you like me to read a couple excerpts from the essays?
Yeah, let's give us one.
Okay. This is the first essay, and I think it really resonates with people. I know when I'm on podcasts, people talk about this one a lot. And she was raised as a fundamentalist Christian, and she says, the problem is my mind, my heart, and my will were the fundamental tools I needed for knowing myself, for connecting with other humans, for making wise choices, for having empathy and showing compassion, for setting clear boundaries, for living a whole and satisfying life. But when my religion demanded that I believe things that were irrational, mythical, or contrary to human decency, it had to undermine or destroy these fundamental tools. what else would they have done? If they hadn't bent my mind, I might have wondered why there are such an amazing number of things in the Bible that make no sense. If they hadn't suppressed my feelings, I might have decided that human compassion is more important than obedience to dogma, and I might have rebelled at being commanded to love a being who sent billions of people to hell.
Well, that gets right to it, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, what's interesting for me, and Jesus, if you want to chime in here anytime, I think back of the research I've done on mythology, and particularly mythology around a female divine, a goddess. And the transformation of that, first, the male deity kind of came along and got incorporated, and there were pantheons of god and goddesses. And then eventually, monotheism started in a number of cultures in Mesopotamia. The Hebrews weren't the only one. And eliminated that notion of a female divine. I'm working on an article about the election. Why did 53% of the white women vote for Trump? And there's, articles abound, of course, and one of them said, well, they probably just didn't want to disagree with their angry brothers, husbands, and fathers. I think it would be really interesting if somebody did some research on the impact of a girl praying to God the Father, Jesus Christ the Son, Holy Spirit, which now is more or less male, though it wasn't in the beginning, and how that impacts your ability to disagree with your husband, to disagree with your father, and to push the button for a woman. Now, 94% of black women voted for Hillary, but I haven't researched this, but I'm sure an equal share of black men voted for Hillary as well. So there was less that conflict. But where there may have been a conflict, where women voted against reproductive rights, against their sexual autonomy, against all of that, was there something there about that religion and that male deity pushing them to agree with the men around them?
Well, it's curious. Just earlier today, I was watching a little bit of C-SPAN. I don't know why in the world I would do that, but there it was on TV. And they had a Democrat representative from the U.S. House. I think they've got the right words. And a black woman actually called up and said that she voted for Trump because Hillary wanted to be able to reach into a woman's womb and rip out her baby and kill it.
Wow.
And I'm thinking to myself,
where do you get that?
Yeah, how can people be so wrong? That it's one of those things that Fox News to me is the modern day example of how mind control works. How if you say a message that's wrong enough, that's so unbelievably possibly true, loud enough, people eventually do believe it.
Well, and Fox, compared to Breitbart, sounds pretty moderate.
I know. That's scary. And, of course, we have Trump has appointed his new planning person, whose name escapes me, but I'm sure you know it on the tip of your tongue.
Bannon.
Yeah.
Who was the head of Breitbart. I mean, that is really scary. And then there's been a lot on Facebook lately about people, sharing information that they don't even check out. They don't go to Snopes. It's an article and they just forward it on. And a lot of people get their news from social media, and the accuracy of it is terrible. And they're not thinking critically. They just, that must be true. That must be true. And that's scary. I mean, what is our education system that people don't even check out anything before they believe it?
Well, and it's one of those things, and I have fallen victim to it more than once, where I see something that matches my worldview or my philosophy or agrees with what I think is true and correct, and I forward it, and someone will point out that I just got played or it was a satirical site. But I try to learn from that, and if I get caught, I will admit it, and I'll change my position or I'll correct it. But not everybody's willing to do that, and I'm optimistic, but I'm still a little scared that the younger generation is much more likely to second guess what they're being fed. I know my kids, they grew up in a world where any email could be a bomb. I mean, not a physical bomb, but a Trojan horse, a virus. Everything is suspect. And when people talk to them, it's always a sales pitch. Everything is someone trying to get something from you. And so when a man, because it's almost always a man, but there are women who did it, stands up on the dais in front of the congregation and says stuff, a younger person is more likely to go, "No, wait a minute. I don't think that's right." And they start looking into it, and that's where they end up leaving the church.
Well, and I put a lot of hope in millennials. My son and his friends, they're much more concerned about social issues, and they're not, they're not going to give up on that. I think that if Trump tries to do something with Roe v. Wade, I think you'll see a revolution, because all these people have grown up with it. They haven't known anything else. And to see that taken away, they might be a little more conservative fiscally, but they're not going to let those basic reproductive rights go. I say, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope you're right. But the first thing is Trump is not going to take it away. What's going to happen is as cases keep going to the Supreme Court, and as states make more and more draconian laws limiting locations, like in Texas, where they had to be registered with a nearby hospital to perform abortion services, and they had to meet all these standards like hallway widths, and you'd have to basically remodel the building to comply with the laws. And the facility's shut down. It goes up through the court system, which can take years, and then eventually gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court might, 3 or 4 years from now, say, we don't really see a problem with those rules. We don't have a problem with abortions, but we also don't have a problem with these rules. And so it de facto becomes illegal without anyone ever saying it's illegal.
Well, I was reading an article about one of the legal concepts called stare decisis, which is it's been decided. And there was just recently, I think it was a Texas case that the Supreme Court shot down exactly what you're talking about. So they have to totally reverse 30 years of decisions. So, it's going to depend on who he gets there. It's going to depend on how long Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is able to stay, and a lot of other things.
Well, and it was funny. Someone said that means for the next 4 years, Trump can put in anybody he wants. And I said, you mean the next 3 years? Because we've now created a pattern where in the last year, the president doesn't get to nominate Supreme Court justices.
And do you think anyone's going to remember that, Phil?
Oh, yeah. Will the Republicans remember that? They'll say no.
No.
That was just that one time. And that's one of those things. I've got family members who were like, yeah, let the people decide. And I said, it's never been done before. It's a new thing. And personally, I think Congress failed to do their job, and they should be subject to being censured or impeached because you failed to do your job.
Exactly.
But they're not going to impeach themselves now, are they?
No.
Well, give us another section. What else you got? Give me one more. We'll talk about that.
This one's pretty good. Let me grab this one.
Sure.
This is a young woman who grew up in the Jehovah's Witnesses church, and she goes to college and she meets this guy, and he's not a Jehovah's Witness, and she's really torn between really falling in love with this man and all of her church teaching, well, you shouldn't even associate with somebody who's not a Jehovah's Witness. And she decides, eventually to sleep with him. And one of her friends, trying to get out of some trouble he's in with the church, kind of turns her in. And so she's called before this tribunal of 3 elders, of course, men.
Of course.
And this is just a short paragraph from that exchange. One of the elders says, "You must consider him a tool of Satan." My face refused to remain neutral as my ears took in this sentence. Did I hear him right? With an expression of incredulity and confusion, I looked back at the elder who'd just spoken and the 2 others on the panel with him and replied, I don't see how that's possible. I don't think you understand. I love him. This isn't a crush. I love him. I wouldn't be with just anybody. Jehovah is a God of love, and this is love, so I don't see how that is even remotely connected to Satan. Well, she comes up with this story. Oh, it's really funny. They had turned her in or something for going and getting the Plan B pill. Uh-oh. And so she makes up this story that she thought by humping the bathtub she could get pregnant. And I think they bought into it anyway. And then she learns later on that one of the elders is having an affair with his sister-in-law. But after that exchange of these men telling her that her boyfriend was Satan, she walked away and she said, she's done. That's when her faith shattered.
Well, that's awesome. Unfortunately, it had to come to that because hopefully they would have just not lied to her in the first place. That would have been the ideal situation.
Exactly. But she wrote under a pseudonym because in that particular denomination, if you are disfellowshipped, it's kind of like excommunication in the Catholic Church, none of your family can have anything to do with you. Now, her mother knows about this, and her aunt, who's a friend of mine, knows that she's an atheist, but nobody else does.
Yeah, we had, I think it's been a year, I've got to have them back. I had on two sisters who left the Jehovah's Witnesses in their 50s. And all the problems and troubles they've had, and the stories that they tell are just mind-numbing of the control and the authoritarianism, and, of course, how the woman must keep her place. She has to obey. It's I've even seen the diagrams, I'm sure a lot of my listeners have, where they have, it's kind of like a ladder structure, and they've got God, and then Jesus, and then man, and then woman, and then children, unless they're men or boys, and they turn 12. And then they suddenly leapfrog above their mom.
Well, I always say it was all downhill after agriculture.
Yeah.
Because you will find tribes throughout, in different countries today even, that are much more egalitarian. So the hypothesis is that hunter-gatherers were, they didn't have a lot of hierarchy, a lot of structure, but the minute they started farming, then they started to own property. And then they had to defend that property. And then you have this centralization, and, back then there wasn't anything like separation of church and state. So the people who controlled the church controlled the city, controlled the village, etc. And women just, any equal rights they had, I'm not sure they had a lot, but they lost them. And that continues forward, where women are simply considered property.
Now, one thing I've gathered from some atheists or some secularists lately in the movement is that religion is not leading to the problem of women not being treated equal, and we should make them our partners, where I'm more inclined to just kind of really bold-faced battle with religion. Where do you fall on this continuum?
Well, I know that if religion were eliminated from the earth, we would still find reasons to disagree with somebody and probably to fight them, whether it's about resources of the earth, coal, oil, whether it's about culture, whether it's about language, whether it's about geography. We're always going to find means to fight. But I think that religion is the last cultural barrier to gender equality. I'm not sure we can get there with religion. Right. So I'm more of a David Silberman type. Everyone knows I'm an atheist. I talk to people. I'm not a street epistemologist. I don't stand out on the corner. But if somebody asks me, we're building a house, and our landscaper at the bottom of his little card has something like trust in Jesus or whatever. And my husband's been working with him, and he tells a story that he was on drugs and alcohol and went to AA and found Jesus, etc. And he was going on and on with my husband about this. And I said, yeah, did you tell him about my book? So we'll see the next time I run into the landscaper whether he wants to chat about it.
That's right. That's right. Well, tell us again about your website and the book and where they can get it. And that way all our listeners know.
The name of the book is Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. It is available in electronic form online. You can order it through most online stores, and it is also in bookstores. The website where my blog is www.faithlessfeminist.com. You can subscribe, then you get an email from me when I post something, but you don't have to. You can just tag it and bookmark it and look at it when you want to. I also have a YouTube channel under Faithless Feminist, and I think once we get moved into the new house, I'm going to do a series on 10 takeaways, because in the last couple of years I've read 120 books about religion, mythology, and the way of me learning and remembering that, I think, is going to be teaching about it. So I'm thinking of starting that series the first of the year.
Well, that sounds like great fun. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show, and hopefully I get to see you in person at an upcoming conference.
The pleasure was mine.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
All right, we just got some things to wrap up today. I do have a couple more reviews. One came in by email, and it was a little long, so I did edit. So you'll forgive me for editing it. But this is from a listener. I just finished listening to podcast 191. I wanted to comment on the critique you read at the end, in which a listener was complaining about how much you brag during your podcasts. I want to offer my counter view. I am very sensitive to that sort of thing myself, and I'm a candidate myself for the category of too much self-congratulations when speaking, as my wife can attest. I've said all that to say I don't really notice you doing it myself. I simply have never noticed you bragging beyond an unwritten acceptable limit. I appreciate very much your podcast content, the way you present it, and the impressive positive effect it tends to have on my thoughts and my understanding of complex concepts in life, whether it be about money, politics, or relationships with those around you. End quote. Well, golly, thank you very much. I'm flattered. I appreciate that very much. On iTunes, of course, if you put a comment somewhere else or know another platform that has comments, let me know. I'll try to read some of them as well. On iTunes, one from Bean FWB. I don't know how to say that. Very short review. Informative, relaxed, but very professionally produced. It's weird, all the experience I have from DJing and speaking and knowing some things about audio mixing. It really seems that easy. So I'm delighted that people think that I'm doing something nice because it just seems like fun. So from M. Renault, I love this podcast. Not only does it provide me with the knowledge I need to make informed financial decisions, it helps me, gosh, I can't read today. It helps keep me up to speed on current secular issues. Not to mention, I'm not just a listener, I'm a client. Well, it sounds like the hair club for men kind of thing, which also supports the secular community. It's a win-win for all. So thank you there. And then the last one, just from a couple of days ago, from MJB52. I heard you on The Thinking Atheist, and I really liked the combination you have. So again, thank you for all the kind reviews. One thing that maybe your listeners can help me with, I am currently working on a list of conventions, conferences, events for 2017. I do want to keep the list specific to atheism, secularism, humanism, free thought, that kind of thing. So I'm going to do a blog post about that. I've already made a list on Facebook. If you find it there, or if you send me an email, if you know an event that's even in the planning stages, I can, of course, update the post as we go through the year. So let me know if you know about anything. And if you yourself are putting on a convention or a one-day event for your community group and you want to come on the show for a few minutes to talk about it, and I know my show's not huge, but if it helps just a few people find your show, I would greatly appreciate it. And, of course, the last thing that the listeners can do to help me out is share the show with your friends. You can copy the links from Facebook. You can talk about it on Twitter. Of course, you can subscribe to a feed through your favorite player. And, of course, let me know if anything breaks in the next few weeks. Got my fingers crossed that it's all going to magically get adjusted. But we're going to wrap up for now. And thank you for listening to the cleverly titled Phil Ferguson Show. Ciao.